The brother who sold her mother's house didn't even have the decency to tell her. The thought didn't arrive fully formed. It began as a flicker of disbelief, a neurological misfire as Clara turned her 10-year-old sedan onto Sycamore Lane. It was a Saturday, which meant it was her day. 6 months had passed since the funeral, a blur of casseroles, cloying sympathies, and the suffocating scent of lilies. 6 months of navigating the strange, untethered landscape of a world without her mother in it. The weekly pilgrimage to the house on Sycamore was the one fixed point in her spinning universe. It was an anchor, a ritual. She would water the roses, sort through a single, manageable box in the attic, and sit in her mother's favorite armchair, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of lavender and old books. Today, however, the landscape was wrong. A violent slash of red had been gashed across the familiar green of the front lawn. It was a sign, hammered into the soft earth where she and Leo had once staged epic watergun battles. A clean, corporate sign with a name she didn't recognize, Callaway Real Estate, and across it, in a brutal, angular font, a banner that screamed, "Sold." Clara's foot spasmed on the brake. The car, a reliable if unremarkable Honda, lurched to a halt in the middle of the quiet street. The world seemed to warp for a moment, the edges of her vision blurring as if viewed through water. The sign couldn't be real. It was an optical illusion, a trick of the late autumn light. Maybe it was for the Hendersons' house next door? But no, it was planted firmly in the lawn she had mown 1,000 times, right beside the flagstone path her father had laid one sweat-drenched summer. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her hand, slick with a sudden, cold sweat, fumbled for the gearshift, her knuckles bumping clumsily against the console. She managed to pull the car to the curb, the tire scraping against the concrete with a sound that felt like a scream. For a full minute, she just sat there, staring, her breath held tight in her chest. Sold. The word was an obscenity. It was an eviction notice for a ghost. Her first instinct was denial, a desperate scrabbling for a logical explanation. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Leo, her practical, ever so efficient older brother, would never. He couldn't. They hadn't even finished going through Mom's things. The attic was still a treasure trove of their shared history, the basement a necropolis of forgotten projects and holiday decorations. Her fingers, clumsy and trembling, found her phone. She scrolled to Leo's contact, the picture of him with his 2 perfect children smiling out at her, a grotesque parody of familial bliss. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, a shrill, hopeful sound in the suffocating silence of the car. Then, it clicked over. You've reached Leo. I'm either in a meeting or away from my desk. Leave a detailed message and I'll get back to you at my earliest convenience. His voice. So calm, so professional. The same voice he used to close $1-million deals, the voice that had always made her feel like a flighty, emotional child. At my earliest convenience. The phrase was a slap in the face. A raw, guttural sound escaped her throat. She pressed the phone to her ear again, as if trying to force him to answer through sheer will. Leo, she whispered, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Leo, what is going on at Mom's house? There's a sign. A sold sign on the lawn. This is some kind of sick joke, right? Call me. Call me now. She ended the call, her thumb hovering over his name, the urge to call again, to scream into his voicemail until it was full, warring with the leaden weight of dread sinking in her stomach. He wouldn't answer. She knew he wouldn't. He was screening her call. Her eyes darted back to the sign. Brenda Callaway. The name was there, printed in elegant script below the blunt force of the word sold. Her mind, latching onto any possible course of action, seized on it. She typed the name into her phone's browser, her fingers slipping on the screen. The website was the first result, a picture of a woman with aggressively blonde hair, a blazer the color of money, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her number was listed prominently. Without allowing herself a moment to think, to lose her nerve, she dialed. Brenda Callaway Real Estate, this is Brenda, a crisp voice answered on the second ring. Hi, yes, my name is Clara Evans, she began, trying to keep her voice steady, to sound like a rational adult and not the hysterical woman she felt herself becoming. I'm calling about the property at 124, Sycamore Lane. I believe there's been a mistake. There's a sold sign on the lawn. There was a pause, the faint sound of typing in the background. Evans, the woman murmured. One moment. The silence stretched, filled only by the frantic thumping of Clara's own blood in her ears. Ah, yes. 124 Sycamore. A lovely property, it went very quickly. It's under contract, due to close next Friday. Is there something I can help you with? The casual, corporate finality of the words knocked the air from her lungs. Under contract? No, you don't understand. That's my mother's house. My brother and we're the owners. Yes, I have the owner of record right here. A Mr. Leo Evans? Brenda's voice was still perfectly pleasant, but now carried an undertone of polite dismissal. She was dealing with a complication. I'm his sister, Clara insisted, her voice rising in pitch. He didn't tell me he was selling it. He couldn't have. We haven't even cleared it out, ma'am, Brenda said, her tone shifting, becoming firmer, like a teacher addressing a difficult child. I can assure you all the legal paperwork is in order. The estate was represented by Mr. Evans, who had full power of attorney. Due to client confidentiality, I really can't discuss the details of the transaction with you. If you have a problem, you'll need to take it up with your brother. Power of attorney. The phrase hung in the air. Clara remembered the day, about a year before their mother died, when Leo had sat them both down at the kitchen table. He'd had a file folder full of documents, explaining that with Mom's memory getting a little fuzzy, it was important to get her affairs in order. It had all seemed so responsible, so Leo. He would handle the bills, the taxes, the difficult decisions. Clara, living an hour away, had been grateful. She had trusted him. She had trusted him to take care of their mother, and by extension, her legacy. She never imagined taking care of things meant liquidating them. Client confidentiality, Clara repeated, the words tasting like ash. You've sold my home out from under me and you're talking about client confidentiality? I understand this is upsetting, Brenda said, her sympathy as manufactured as the polish on her nails, but my hands are tied. I suggest you speak with your brother. Have a nice day. The line went dead. Clara dropped the phone onto the passenger seat as if it were burning her hand. The world outside her windshield seemed to tilt on its axis. The familiar houses, the neatly trimmed lawns, the crisp blue sky, it was all a facade, a stage set for a play in which she was no longer a cast member. She got out of the car, her legs unsteady. The keys to the house felt heavy and useless in her pocket. A relic. Clara? Honey, is that you? The voice pulled her from her daze. It was Mrs. Gable from next door, a woman whose entire life seemed to be a vigil conducted from her living room window. She was standing on her porch, her hand clutching the collar of her floral print housecoat. Mrs. Gable, Clara said, her voice a hollow croak. The older woman's face, a roadmap of neighborhood history, creased with concern. She bustled down her steps and across the lawn, her slippers making soft, scuffing sounds on the pavement. I saw the car. I thought, oh, that's Clara's Saturday visit, she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. She gestured towards the sign with a tilt of her head. You just finding out now, dear? Clara could only nod, a profound, soul-deep weariness settling over her. Mrs. Gable clucked her tongue. Oh, that boy. Always in such a hurry. Your brother, I mean. Leo. He was so efficient about it all. Said he was taking care of everything so you wouldn't have to worry your pretty head about it. The words, meant to be comforting, were tiny, poison darts. So you wouldn't have to worry. He had framed it as a kindness. The ultimate paternalistic betrayal. He had an estate sale a few weeks back, Mrs. Gable continued, warming to her topic, the neighborhood's unofficial town crier. A big one. Cars lined up all down the street. People were walking out with all sorts. Lamps, dishes, even your mother's old sewing machine. I almost went over to buy a little footstool, the one she always used in the den, just to keep it in the family, so to speak. But then I thought, no, it's not my place, and estate sale. The image flooded Clara's mind with horrifying clarity, strangers, vultures with cash in their hands, picking through the artifacts of her mother's life. their grubby fingers on the porcelain teacups she'd inherited from Grandma, haggling over the price of the worn armchair where their father used to read the Sunday paper, weighing the sentimental value of a lifetime in dollars and cents. She felt a wave of nausea so powerful she had to brace herself against the side of her car. He cleared the whole place out in a weekend, Mrs. Gable finished, oblivious to the devastation she was wreaking. A lovely young couple bought it, I hear. From the city. They want to gut the kitchen, they told me. Put in one of those big islands. Gut the kitchen. The kitchen where her mother had taught her to bake, the counters perpetually dusted with flour. The kitchen that smelled of cinnamon on Christmas morning and roasted chicken on Sundays. They were going to tear out its heart and replace it with granite and stainless steel. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, Clara managed to say, her throat tight. I have to go. She turned away before the woman could offer any more well-meaning, soul-crushing details. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Leaving felt like surrender. It felt like accepting that this shell, this hollowed-out vessel on a street she no longer recognized, was all that was left. She began to walk the perimeter of the property, a ghost locked out of her own haunting. Her feet followed a familiar path worn into the grass along the side of the house, a shortcut to the backyard she had taken since she was a child. She peered into the dining room window. Empty. The long mahogany table where they had hosted every Thanksgiving of her life was gone. The china cabinet that held generations of crystal and silver was gone. All that remained were faint rectangles of lighter paint on the walls where pictures used to hang. She moved to the back of the house, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The porch swing was gone. In its place were two stark, empty hooks screwed into the ceiling of the porch. A phantom limb. She closed her eyes and could almost feel the gentle sway, the familiar creak of the chains. She could hear her father's low chuckle as he pushed her, higher and higher, her small legs kicking at the sky. She could taste the tartness of the lemonade her mother would bring out in a sweating glass pitcher, the ice clinking a cheerful melody against the glass. The memory was so vivid, so complete, that when she opened her eyes, the emptiness of the porch was a physical blow. Her gaze drifted to the kitchen window above the sink. She saw a ghost there, too, her mother, her hair tied up in a colorful scarf, hands plunged in soapy water, turning to smile and wave as Clara and Leo played in the sprinkler. The image was as real as the splintering wood of the window frame, a memory seared onto the very glass. But inside, there was nothing. Just a bare counter and a stark, empty space. She continued her funereal procession around the house. Her fingers traced the deep scratches on the back door frame, a testament to years of a golden retriever, long gone, who had pawed to be let in. Then she saw it, a landmark she had forgotten until this very moment. By the side of the garage, tucked under the eaves, was the other doorframe, the one they had used as a growth chart. It was still there. A vertical timeline of their lives, etched in pencil and ink. Clara, age 5, was a faint, graphite smudge near the bottom. Leo, age 7, in their mother's neat cursive. Higher up, the markings became more hurried, more confident. Leo, 13, taller than Mom. Scrawled in his own adolescent hand. The last mark was hers, Clara, 16, with a small, defiant flower drawn next to it. It was all there. A history book written on a piece of wood. A book that was about to be painted over, or worse, torn out and thrown on a scrap heap by strangers. She leaned her forehead against the cool, painted wood, a dry sob catching in her throat. He had sold this. He had put a price tag on the very inches of their growth, the recorded evidence of their shared childhood, and sold it. Finally, she made her way to the rose garden. Her mother's sanctuary. She had spent hours here, her hands gloved, her face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, coaxing beauty from the soil. Each bush had a name, a story. The pale pink, Queen Elizabeth, from her own mother's garden. The vibrant red Mr. Lincoln her father had given her for their 20th anniversary. The delicate, creamy peace rose planted the year Leo was born. They were a mess. The blooms were browning and shriveled, the leaves spotted with black fungus. The ground was cracked and dry. Leo hadn't even bothered to water them. This small act of neglect, this casual indifference to the one living thing their mother had loved most, felt like the cruelest betrayal of all. It was one thing to sell the bricks and mortar, a pragmatic, if heartless, act. It was another to let her living legacy wither and die. Clara knelt, her knees digging into the hard dirt, and touched a velvety, decaying petal of a Mr. Lincoln bloom. It crumbled to dust between her fingers. And that's when the tears finally came. Not loud, histrionic sobs, but silent, hot tears that tracked pathways through the dust on her cheeks. She was crying for the roses, for the house, for the memories being systematically erased. She was crying for her mother, whose entire existence had been so callously packaged and sold. And she was crying for the loss of her brother, the boy who had once carved his name next to hers on a doorframe, now a stranger who saw their past as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated. She didn't know how long she knelt there, lost in a fog of grief and rage. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The air grew cold, raising goosebumps on her arms. The street lights on Sycamore Lane flickered on one by one, casting long, lonely shadows across the lawn. The sold sign glowed with an almost malevolent intensity in the twilight. She was numb, hollowed out. She had no plan, no course of action. There was nothing to be done. The real estate agent's words echoed in her mind, "It's under contract. All the paperwork is in order." Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a violent, jarring sound in the funereal quiet. She pulled it out, her hand stiff with cold. The screen illuminated a single word, LEO. For a moment, she stared at it, her thumb hovering over the red decline button. She wanted to let it ring, to deny him the courtesy of an answer, to let him stew in the silence just as he had let her stew in her shock all afternoon. But the need for answers, for a confrontation, was a physical craving, a burning acid in her gut. She swiped to answer. "Hello," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. A stranger's voice. There was a pause, a faint static on the line. Then, his voice, not apologetic or panicked, but weary. Infuriatingly weary, as if she were the one inconveniencing him. "Clara. I got your message, did you?" she replied, the words clipped and sharp. He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of exasperation that she knew was designed to make her feel irrational. It was a sound he had perfected over a lifetime of sibling arguments. "Look, I know you're upset. I was going to tell you." The lie was so bald, so insulting, it almost made her laugh. A hysterical, broken sound. "When, Leo?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "When were you going to tell me? After the new owners moved in? When you sent me a change of address card for our childhood? Or were you just going to wait until a check for my half mysteriously showed up in my bank account?" "It's not that simple," he said, his voice taking on the defensive, condescending tone he used when he was about to explain something he thought was beyond her emotional comprehension. "It was for the best. It had to be done." "For the best?" she repeated, the words catching in her throat. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, her gaze fixed on the dark, empty windows of the house. "You sold our home, Leo. You sold Mom's house without saying a word to me. You let strangers pick over her life in an estate sale. And you think that was for the best?" "We need to talk," he said, completely ignoring her question, steamrolling her pain with his own agenda. "In person. Not over the phone." "Oh, I think we do," she snarled, the rage finally boiling over, hot and cleansing. "I'm here now. Come to the house, Leo. Come stand on the lawn you sold and explain this to my face." Another pause. She could picture him perfectly, rubbing the bridge of his nose, looking at his expensive watch, calculating the time it would take, the inconvenience it would cause. "No," he said finally, his voice firm. "Not at the house. Meet me for coffee tomorrow. 10 a.m. The Grind Spot on Main." The Grind Spot. A noisy, impersonal cafe with bad art and overpriced lattes. A neutral territory. He was treating this like a business negotiation, a hostile merger. The finality in his tone, the utter refusal to meet her on the sacred ground of their past, was the final, deepest cut. He had already moved on. He had closed the door, locked it, and sold the key. Before she could scream, before she could unleash the torrent of grief and fury that was threatening to tear her apart, he spoke again. "I'll see you then, Clara." And he hung up. She stood alone in the gathering dark, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dead air. The wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in the front yard, a sound that had once been a comfort, a lullaby. Tonight, it just sounded like whispering. The house stood before her, a dark silhouette against the dying light, no longer a home, but a tombstone. And she finally understood. He hadn't just sold the house. He had sold them. Everything they had been, everything that had tied them together, had been packed up, priced, and carted away by strangers. She hadn't just lost her mother's house. She had lost her brother, too. The grind spot on Main was a temple built to the worship of caffeinated productivity. It smelled of aggressively roasted coffee beans, steamed milk, and the faint, chemical scent of laptop wipes. The air, thick with the hiss and gurgle of the espresso machine, hummed with the low murmur of a dozen conversations and the furious clatter of fingers on keyboards. It was a place for transactions, for meetings between people who had agendas and limited time. It was, Clara thought as she slid into the worn vinyl of a booth, the perfect place for her brother to execute a soul. She had arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained by a mother who believed punctuality was a cardinal virtue. Now, it felt like a tactical error, granting the sterile environment time to seep into her bones, to dilute the pure, incandescent rage that had sustained her through a sleepless night. She had spent the dark hours pacing her small apartment, replaying every slight, every dismissal, every memory of the house on Sycamore Lane. She had rehearsed speeches, crafted arguments, and prepared declarations of war. But here, under the jaundiced glow of industrial chic lighting, with a soundtrack of indie folk music playing just loud enough to be annoying, her fury felt out of place, like a wild animal brought to heel in a sterile cage. She watched the door, her stomach a tight knot of dread and anticipation. Every time a new customer entered, a jangle of the bell above the door would send a jolt through her nervous system. She imagined him walking in, a man she had known her entire life, a face as familiar as her own reflection, yet she had no idea who she was about to meet. Was it the brother who had taught her to ride a bike, patiently holding the seat until she found her balance? Or was it this new man, this cold-eyed administrator who could sign away their shared history on a dotted line? At 10:07, he arrived. Leo pushed through the glass door, a blast of cold November air swirling in with him. He was dressed in his weekday armor, a sharply pressed charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, no tie. He carried a sleek leather briefcase in one hand and was already scanning the room, his eyes sharp and assessing, as if searching for a business associate. He spotted her and his expression didn't soften. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of apology, just a slight, almost imperceptible nod as he navigated the crowded space. He slid into the booth opposite her, placing his briefcase on the seat beside him with a soft thud. It sat between them like a barricade. "Clara," he said. It wasn't a greeting, it was an acknowledgement of her presence. "You're late," she said, the words small and petty, a pathetic opening salvo in a war she felt she was already losing. "Traffic," he replied, a one-word dismissal as he waved down a passing barista. "Just a black coffee for me." He looked at Clara, his eyebrows raised in a question that was not a question. "You want anything?" She shook her head, unable to speak. The thought of swallowing anything, of trying to force a warm liquid down her constricted throat, was impossible. He hadn't even made eye contact with her yet. His gaze was directed at the barista, at the menu board, at the window, anywhere but at the raw, gaping wound of her grief sitting directly across from him. The coffee arrived with transactional speed. Leo wrapped his long fingers around the hot ceramic mug, a gesture she had seen him make 1,000 times before 1,000 different meetings. He was performing a role, the calm, rational man in charge. He took a sip, his eyes finally meeting hers over the rim of the cup. "Okay," he began, placing the mug down with a decisive click. "I know last night was difficult. I wanted to do this face to face so I could explain things properly." "Explain?" The word came out as a choked whisper. She cleared her throat, forcing venom into her voice. "There is no explanation for what you did, Leo. There is only a confession." He ignored the barb, his expression unchanging. "I did what had to be done. It was a practical decision." He reached down and unlatched his briefcase. The sound of the metallic snaps echoed in the small space between them. He pulled out a thick manila folder, bulging with papers, and laid it on the table, squaring its edges so they were perfectly parallel with the edge of the table. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is reality. This is what you don't see when you're remembering lemonade on the porch swing. He opened it, and the contents spilled out slightly, a sheaf of documents, spreadsheets, and letters with intimidating letterheads. He was armed with facts, with figures, with the cold, hard logic of the world he inhabited. Let's start with the basics, he said, his voice the one he used for quarterly reports. The house was a money pit, Clara. A complete and total drain. The roof, as you know, has been leaking for years. I got 3 quotes to replace it. The lowest was $22,000. The furnace was on its last legs. The technician who came out in February said we were lucky it made it through the winter. That's another $8,000, minimum. The property taxes went up 6% this year. 6%. That's nearly $700 a month just to keep the county happy. He slid a spreadsheet across the table. It was a meticulous, color-coded ledger of expenses, dates, and projections. It was beautiful in its brutal efficiency. She stared at the columns of numbers, but they were meaningless, an alien language. I don't care about the taxes, Leo. You should, he shot back, his voice sharp. Because Mom didn't have the money. We didn't have the money. He pulled out another document, this one from a bank. Do you know what this is? It's the statement for her reverse mortgage. She took it out 5 years ago, after Dad died, to supplement her income. She was living on the equity of the house. Every month, the debt grew. By the time she passed, there was less than $50,000 of value left in a property assessed at over $500,000. It was a ticking time bomb. Another year or 2 of taxes and repairs, and we would have owed the bank money. The house would have been foreclosed on. Is that what you wanted? For the bank to take it? For all of Mom's life to be reduced to a negative number on a balance sheet? His logic was a cage, and he was methodically locking her inside it. Every point he made was rational, sensible. And every rational, sensible point felt like a betrayal. What about the power of attorney? She asked, her voice trembling. Brenda Calloway said you had it. Mom gave that to you so you could pay her bills, not so you could sell her life. She gave it to me to make the hard decisions she couldn't make anymore, he said, his voice rising for the first time, attracting a sideways glance from a student at the next table. He lowered it instantly, leaning across the table, his words a low, intense hiss. Remember the last year, Clara? Really remember it. Not the curated weekend visits. I'm talking about the day-to-day. She was confused. She was scared. She tried to pay the water bill 3 times in 1 month and then forgot about the electricity for 2. She left the stove on. Twice. She trusted me to handle things. She signed that paper because she knew she couldn't manage, and she knew I would be the one to do what was necessary, not what was sentimental. He framed it as a sacred duty, a burden he had carried for their mother's sake. He made his betrayal sound like an act of profound love and responsibility. It was masterful. And it was sickening. So you sold it, she said, the words flat. And the estate sale? Mrs. Gable told me. You sold her things, Leo. Her sewing machine. Her teacups. And what were you going to do with them? He countered, his eyes hard. Put them in a storage unit? Pay $150 a month to keep a bunch of dusty china and a sewing machine neither of us knows how to use? It's just stuff, Clara. It's not Mom. Holding on to it, letting it all rot in a house that was bankrupting us, that's not honoring her. It's a sickness. It's hoarding. It's not stuff. The dam of her control finally broke. Her voice cracked, tears blurring the spreadsheet in front of her into a meaningless smear of lines and numbers. It wasn't just stuff. It was her life. It was our life. Every one of those stupid teacups had a story. Every book on her shelf had her notes in the margin. The scratch on the floor by the den, that was from you, when you fell off the couch trying to fly like Superman. You sold that. You put a price tag on it and you sold it to strangers. His calm, businesslike facade finally, irrevocably, cracked. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a flash of something dark and bitter, a resentment so deep it seemed to pull at the very structure of his face, making him look older, harder. You have no idea what it was like, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. He pushed the folder away, the pretense of a business meeting dissolving into the raw, ugly truth. Absolutely no idea. He leaned back in the booth, the anger radiating from him in palpable waves. You got to be the fun weekend daughter. You'd breeze in on a Saturday with a bouquet of flowers and stories about your job, your friends, your life. You'd sit with her for 3 hours, hold her hand, look at old photo albums, and then you'd breeze back out to your life, feeling sad but good about yourself. You did your daughterly duty. You got the best of her. You got the memories. He took a sharp breath, his nostrils flaring. I got the reality. I was the one who got the call at 2 in the morning when she fell trying to get to the bathroom. I was the one who had to argue with the home care nurse who was stealing her medication. I was the one who had to sit with her while she cried because she couldn't remember Dad's face. You visited a museum, Clara. A shrine to a life that was already over. I lived in a hospital ward. I was the janitor, the accountant, and the prison guard. Clara stared at him, speechless. This was a version of Leo she had never seen, a landscape of bitterness she had never known existed. You want to talk about memories? He continued, his voice thick with a pain that was suddenly, shockingly real. My memories of that house for the last 2 years aren't of lemonade on the porch. They're of the smell of antiseptic and urine. They're of the sound of the television blaring at all hours because the silence scared her. They're of me, sitting at that kitchen table, the one you love so much, not baking cookies, but sorting through piles of bills and Medicare statements that made no sense, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on. That house, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a terrible confession of its own, stopped being a home for me a long time ago. It was a weight. It was an obligation. It was the place where I watched our mother fade away into someone I didn't recognize. Selling it was a relief, Clara. It was the only way I could finally stop going there. It was the only way I could finally let her go. The raw honesty of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She saw, for the first time, the chasm that had opened between them. They had experienced the last years of their mother's life from opposite sides of a canyon, and they had been looking at 2 completely different landscapes. Her view was of a treasured past to be preserved. His was of a traumatic present to be escaped. But his pain, however real, didn't excuse his cruelty. It didn't give him the right to erase her past along with his. Why didn't you tell me? She finally asked, her voice quiet, stripped of its earlier rage and filled now with a profound, aching sorrow. Why couldn't you have just told me you were struggling? That you felt this way? Because I knew what you would say, he shot back, leaning forward again. You would have given me the sentimental speech. But Leo, it's our home. It's all we have left of them. You would have made it about your feelings, your memories. You wouldn't have seen the reality of the leaking roof and the mounting debt. You wouldn't have understood. I tried to help, she insisted, the injustice of his accusation reigniting a spark of her anger. I tried. How many times did I offer to come stay for a week? How many times did I ask you to let me handle the bills for a month so you could have a break? And what did you always say? He looked away, his jaw tight. You said, I've got it handled, Clara. Don't worry about it. I'm closer, it's easier for me. You pushed me away, Leo. Every single time. You wrapped yourself up in this cloak of martyrdom and you refused to let me in. You made it your burden and your burden alone, and now you're using it as a weapon against me. It's not fair. Fair? He let out a short, bitter laugh. Nothing about this has been fair. No, it hasn't, she agreed, her voice gaining strength. Because you talk about that house like it was an asset in a portfolio. Like it was just a line item on one of your spreadsheets. It was our home, Leo. It was the only place left on earth that felt like Mom and Dad were still in it. You didn't just sell a house, you sold our entire childhood. You sold her. She took a shaky breath, the full weight of what had been stolen from her settling in her chest. And the worst part is, you didn't even give me a chance. You just assumed I was a sentimental idiot who couldn't understand reality. She fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking, and pulled out a folded, slightly crumpled brochure. She slid it across the table, over his spreadsheet. It was for a local historical preservation society. He glanced down at it, confused. I had a plan, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. I was going to save it. I was looking into getting a historical grant to fix the roof, to help with the upkeep. I was talking to a landscaper about how to preserve Mom's rose garden, maybe even get it designated as a local landmark. I had a plan to honor her, Leo. To keep her memory alive in a way that wasn't just about stuff. I was going to turn it into something beautiful, something permanent. She looked at him, her eyes pleading with him to understand, to see the future he had destroyed. I was going to ask you to help me. I was working up the courage to present it to you, to show you that we could do it together. You got there first with a for sale sign. The chasm between them yawned into an uncrossable canyon. Her plan, which had seemed so noble and right in her mind, sounded fragile and foolish in the harsh light of this coffee shop. In the face of his brutal pragmatism, Leo stared at the brochure, then back at her. There was no flicker of regret in his eyes, no dawning horror at what he had done. There was only a weary pity. A grant, Clara, he said, his voice flat and dismissive. A landmark? That's not a plan. That's a fantasy. That's a Hallmark movie. This is the real world. A world with closing costs and capital gains tax. He pushed the brochure back towards her. It's done. The closing is Friday. You can hate me for it, but it's done. He reached into his briefcase again, but this time he pulled out a simple bank folder. I've arranged for a direct transfer. Your half of the proceeds, after paying off the mortgage and all the fees, will be wired to your account by Monday. It's about $93,000. $93,000. He had reduced her entire history, her memories, her mother's legacy, and her broken heart to a number. A transaction. He was paying her off. He stood up, slinging the strap of his briefcase over his shoulder. The meeting was over. He had presented his case, weathered the emotional outburst, and delivered the bottom line. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and tossed a crumpled $10 bill onto the table. It landed next to her untouched water glass. For the coffee, he said. The casual cruelty of the gesture, the final reduction of this catastrophic, life-altering conversation to a simple cafe transaction, was the most painful blow of all. He was closing the books on them. This is for the best, Clara, he said, the hollow mantra of a man desperate to believe his own lie. Someday, you'll understand. He turned and walked away without a backward glance, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd and out the door, the little bell announcing his departure with a cheerful, obscene jingle. Clara sat frozen in the booth, the noise of the coffee shop rushing back in to fill the vacuum he had left behind. The hiss of the steamer, the clatter of plates, the laughter from a nearby table, it all sounded like it was coming from a great distance. She stared at the $10 bill lying on the table, a pathetic, insulting severance package. The weight of it all finally crashed down on her. The legal reality. The financial finality. It was over. The house was gone. But as she sat there, utterly alone in a room full of strangers, she understood the deeper, more terrible truth. The house, in the end, was just bricks and wood and memories. The real loss, the one that could never be repaired or repurchased, was the man who had just walked out the door. The brother who saw their shared soul as a property to be cleared, a liability to be sold to the highest bidder. The chasm between them was no longer just a difference of perspective. It was a grave, and he had just finished filling it in.